And what exactly is this Marine brat supposed to teach us about marksmanship? Did Daddy buy you a rifle for graduation? The crowd of 2,000 troops, a sprawling ocean of digital camouflage and polished boots shimmering under the relentless Coronado sun, rippled with a wave of uneasy laughter. It was the kind of laughter that sought permission from authority, a nervous, sycophantic sound that echoed the condescension dripping from Lieutenant Commander Hayes's voice. He stood with his hands on his hips, his jaw set in a mask of theatrical skepticism, a petty king surveying his court of conscripts. But the woman at the firing line, the target of his scorn, offered no reaction. Her name, as far as they knew, was Anna, a civilian contractor brought in to demonstrate a new experimental targeting system. She was unassuming to the point of being invisible. Her plain khaki cargo pants and simple gray t-shirt were a stark contrast to the rigid uniformity surrounding her. She didn't flinch. She didn't sigh. Her gaze remained fixed downrange, her expression as placid and unreadable as the deep blue Pacific stretching out behind the dusty berms of the rifle range. Her silence was a vacuum, and Hayes, a man who detested a void, rushed to fill it with more of his own hot air. But when the four-star Admiral, standing at the back of the formation, a man whose face was a roadmap of forgotten conflicts, saw the way she canted her head, the subtle shift in her stance as she absorbed the weight of the rifle, his eyes narrowed. He saw something the lieutenant commander, in his blinding arrogance, could not. He saw a ghost. If you believe that true competence needs no introduction and that respect is a currency earned in silence, type vindication below. The entire exercise was a carefully orchestrated piece of military theater, a demonstration for the Navy's top brass to justify the nine-figure budget of the new M210 enhanced sniper rifle platform. Lieutenant Commander Hayes was the master of ceremonies, a role he relished with the pompous enthusiasm of a man who believed his rank was a direct measure of his wisdom. He strode back and forth before the assembled crowd, his voice amplified by a portable loudspeaker system, creating a stage for himself on the baked asphalt. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, gesturing with a flourish toward the firing line, "we are here today to witness the future of naval warfare. Precision, power, and process." He paused for effect, letting the word hang in the salty air. A process so advanced, so user-friendly, that even a civilian contractor, a Marine brat with no real-world experience, could supposedly operate it. He shot a pointed, smirking glance at Anna, who was methodically checking the rifle's action, her movements economical and fluid, completely ignoring his performance. Her focus was absolute, a bubble of professional calm in a sea of posturing. The insult, Marine brat, was a calculated jab. He had gleaned from her sparse file that her father was a retired Marine Corps general, a fact he twisted into a narrative of nepotism and unearned privilege. In his mind, she was simply the daughter of a name, a token civilian brought in to make the technology seem accessible. He couldn't conceive of any other reason for her presence. The real snipers, the seasoned SEALs and Marine Scout snipers from the assembled units, stood with their arms crossed, their faces grim. They knew the smell of a political dog-and-pony show, and Hayes's arrogant monologue was making the entire affair reek of cheap cologne and desperation. They watched Anna not with scorn, but with a guarded curiosity. They saw the details Hayes missed, the way her boots, though civilian, were scuffed and worn in a pattern that spoke of thousands of hours on rough terrain, not city sidewalks. They saw the calluses on her hands as she worked the rifle's bolt, the practiced, almost unconscious efficiency of her movements. She wasn't a novice playing with a new toy. She was a master craftsman checking her tools. Her silence continued to unnerve Hayes, who interpreted it as weakness, as confirmation of her inadequacy. He needed a reaction, a flicker of fear or anger to validate his dominance. So he escalated. "Tell me, Ms. Anna," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity as he approached her, "have you ever even held a weapon this sophisticated? Or is this a significant step up from the 22 you used at summer camp?" The troops shifted uncomfortably. The joke had soured. This was no longer just professional arrogance. It was targeted, personal humiliation. And still, she said nothing. She simply finished her inspection of the rifle, gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the range safety officer, and settled into her shooting position. Her body seemed to melt into the ground, becoming a part of the earth, a stable, unmovable platform of bone and muscle. The act of ignoring him so completely was a louder refutation than any shouted retort could ever be. It was a statement of supreme confidence, a quiet declaration that his words were irrelevant, that his opinions were merely noise, and that the only thing that mattered was the task at hand. The Admiral at the back of the crowd, Admiral Croft, watched this silent exchange with a growing sense of recognition. He had seen that stillness before. He had seen it in the jungles of the Philippines, in the mountains of Afghanistan, in the eyes of the quietest, most lethal operators the military had ever produced. It was the calm of the predator, the absolute focus of the true professional. And as Anna placed her cheek against the stock of the rifle, Croft felt a cold certainty crystallize in his gut. Lieutenant Commander Hayes was a man standing on a landmine, blissfully unaware that he was about to be erased. He had just publicly insulted a living legend. An entire world was about to watch the detonation. The demonstration's parameters were designed for failure, a classic military procurement tactic to test a system to its absolute breaking point. The target was a standard silhouette, but it was placed at a staggering 2,500 meters, well beyond the rifle's advertised effective range. A deceptive crosswind, invisible to the naked eye but a treacherous river of air at altitude, was whipping across the range. The new targeting computer, the centerpiece of the M210 system, was programmed to account for these variables. The plan was simple. Anna, the designated amateur, would fire the shot, the computer would do the work, the bullet would hit the target, and the Navy would sign a very large check. But technology, like the men who build it, is fallible. As Anna settled in, the lead engineer from the defense contractor nervously tapped at a tablet linked to the rifle's scope. A bead of sweat traced a path through the dust on his forehead. "We have a problem," he muttered to Hayes, his voice a low panic. "The wind sensor array is offline. The ballistic computer it's dead. It's a dead stick landing. We have no data, no firing solution." A wave of murmurs washed over the assembled observers. Hayes's face went pale, then flushed a deep, angry red. His perfect presentation was crumbling into a public catastrophe. He snatched the tablet, staring at the error message as if his glare could intimidate it back into operation. "Reboot it. Do something," he hissed, his voice cracking under the pressure. The engineer shook his head. "It's a hardware failure, sir. There's nothing to reboot. The shot is impossible. No human can make that calculation on the fly. Not with this wind, at this range. We need to scrub the demonstration," but Anna didn't move. She hadn't even looked at the frantic men beside her. I was still pressed to the scope, but she was no longer looking through it. She was feeling the world around it. She took a slow, deep breath, tasting the salt and moisture in the air. She watched a single blade of grass twitching on the berm 20 feet in front of her. She watched a heat shimmer rise from a distant rock. She was reading the unseen language of the environment, a language she had learned in the harshest classrooms on Earth. Without a word, she reached up and, with a soft click, detached the power cable from the sophisticated digital scope. The massive screen went black. She then flipped up a set of simple iron sights, a feature most considered a vestigial appendage on such a high-tech weapon. A collective gasp went through the crowd of seasoned snipers. Iron sights, at 2,500 meters, in a variable crosswind. It wasn't just impossible, it was sacrilege. It was a feat that belonged in the realm of myth, a tall tale told over beers in a VFW hall. Hayes stared, his mouth agape. What in God's name is she doing? Stop her. That's a billion-dollar piece of equipment, not a toy. But Admiral Croft's voice, quiet yet carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute command, cut through the air. "Let her shoot, Commander." The words were a flat, unappealable order. A profound silence fell over the range, a silence so deep it felt physical. The only sound was the whisper of the wind and the impossibly steady rhythm of Anna's breathing. She let out half a breath, held it, and the world seemed to slow down. Her finger rested on the trigger, not pulling but becoming one with it. Her mind was a whirlwind of instinctual calculus, a torrent of data processed, not by silicon chips, but by years of brutal, unforgiving experience. She saw the wind as a current, felt the Coriolis effect as a subtle pull on the earth beneath her, and understood the ballistic arc of the bullet not as a mathematical equation, but as an extension of her own will. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, a sharp, clean report that cracked like lightning across the silent range. For a moment, nothing happened. The 2,000 troops held their breath, their eyes straining toward the distant, almost invisible target. Hayes let out a short, derisive snort. Ready to unleash a torrent of "I told you so" then, a sound returned. A faint, metallic ping, impossibly small, and yet louder than a bomb in the cathedral-like silence. It was a sound of pure, undeniable truth. On the large monitor displaying a telescopic view of the target, a small black hole appeared, dead center in the silhouette's head. A perfect shot. For a full 10 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The crowd was a statue garden of disbelief. The snipers, men who had dedicated their lives to the art of the long-range shot, simply stared, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. They hadn't just seen a great shot. They had seen something that defied the known laws of their craft. It was like watching a man walk on water. Hayes's face was a crumbling mask of horror and confusion. His arrogance, so solid and imposing only moments before, had been vaporized. He looked from the screen to the woman, now calmly clearing the rifle's chamber, her movements as serene as if she had just finished a routine task. "No," he whispered, the word a dry rasp. "No way. That's not possible. That was luck. A 1 in a billion fluke, but it wasn't luck." The Admiral knew it. The snipers knew it. Luck doesn't have a posture. Luck doesn't breathe like that. Luck doesn't turn off a supercomputer to use iron sights. That was not the signature of chance. It was the signature of a master, a grandmaster, a ghost. Admiral Croft moved then, his steps slow and deliberate as he walked from the back of the formation toward the firing line. The sea of sailors and Marines parted for him like water for a ship's bow. His face, usually a stern but fair mask of command, was now etched with a profound, almost reverent awe. He didn't look at the sputtering Lieutenant Commander Hayes. He didn't look at the stunned engineers or the silent crowd. His eyes were fixed on the woman who was now methodically cleaning the rifle, her focus still entirely on her tools. The Admiral stopped a few feet away from her, his presence commanding the absolute attention of every person on the base. He turned to his aide, a young, sharp-faced captain. "Captain, bring up the service record for contractor Anna Rostova." Put on the main screen, the captain, confused, fumbled with his encrypted datapad. "Sir? Rostova? Her file just says Anna, no last name. Civilian consultant. Level 3 clearance." Croft's voice was cold steel. "There's a deep file designation. Access code, Valkyrie 7. Authorize it with my command override." Now, the name Valkyrie sent a jolt through the handful of special operators in the crowd. It was a call sign from myth, a name whispered in classified briefings, a ghost that haunted the nightmares of America's enemies. The captain's fingers flew across the screen. A moment later, the image of the target on the massive display flickered and was replaced by a government personnel file. The silence on the range deepened, if that were even possible. The air grew thick with anticipation. The name at the top of the file read, Rostova, Anya, yes, Master Chief Special Warfare Operator. The title alone was a thunderclap. A Master Chief, and not just any Master Chief. The screen began to populate with data, each line item landing like a hammer blow to Hayes's shattered ego. Unit, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. DevGru, the official, sanitized name for SEAL Team 6. The best of the best. The elite of the elite. Combat Deploiement 14. The rest of the line was a long, black bar of redaction. Combat hours, classified. Mission classifications, top secret / tier 1 operations. The screen was a litany of impossible achievements, a resume written in blood and shadow. Then came the awards. A list scrolled down the screen that made the assembled troops gasp. Silver Star, and another. And a third, Bronze Star with V4 Valor, 5 oak leaf clusters. Purple Heart for clusters. And then at the very top of the list, the one that silenced all thought, all breath. The Navy Cross. The second highest award for valor in combat. A medal spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. It was an award that meant its recipient had faced impossible odds and not only survived, but triumphed with extraordinary heroism. Lieutenant Commander Hayes swayed on his feet, his face the color of ash. He stared at the woman, this unassuming Marine brat, and saw her for the first time. He wasn't looking at a contractor. He was looking at one of the most decorated and lethal special operators in modern military history. He had not just insulted a subordinate. He had committed an act of professional suicide in front of 2,000 witnesses. He had publicly humiliated a warrior who had bled more for her country than he could ever comprehend. The weight of his ignorance, his prejudice, his spectacular public failure crashed down on him. Admiral Croft let the information hang in the air for a long moment, allowing the full weight of the truth to settle upon the crowd. He then turned his full attention to the woman who was now standing, the rifle held loosely in one hand. She looked back at him, her expression unchanged, her calm unwavering. She had not looked at the screen. She didn't need to. She knew who she was. The Admiral, a man who had commanded fleets and stood before presidents, did something no one on that base had ever seen him do. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight, and executed the sharpest, most formal salute of his long and storied career. It was not the salute of a superior to a subordinate. It was the salute of a warrior to a warrior, a gesture of profound, absolute respect. Master Chief Rostova, his voice boomed, clear and resonant across the silent assembly. Permission to speak freely, ma'am. The use of the word ma'am from a 4-star admiral to an operator who appeared half his age was the final, devastating blow. It reordered the entire universe of that naval base. It was the ultimate validation. Anna, or rather, Master Chief Rostova, simply nodded. Permission granted, Admiral. Her voice was quiet, calm, and utterly devoid of triumph. Croft kept his salute held, his eyes locked on hers. He then turned his head, slightly, his gaze falling upon the petrified form of Lieutenant Commander Hayes. Commander, the Admiral's voice was now laced with Arctic fury. You stand before a legend. You stand before a woman who has undertaken missions that you do not have the clearance to even read about. The daddy you so flippantly mentioned was General Rostova, who lost his leg in Fallujah. He didn't buy his daughter a rifle. He taught her that respect is earned, not demanded. A lesson you have clearly failed to learn. He lowered his salute and took a step closer to Hayes, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that still seemed to carry to the farthest ears. You questioned her experience. Master Chief Rostova has forgotten more about marksmanship under fire than you will ever know. That impossible shot she just made with iron sights? She has made harder shots in the dark, in a storm, with lives on the line. What you witnessed today was not a demonstration of technology. It was a demonstration of character, of competence, of a quiet professionalism that you, in your loud, empty arrogance, could not recognize. He turned back to the crowd. Let this be a lesson to every single one of you. The measure of a warrior is not the volume of their voice or the rank on their collar. It is the steel in their spine and the calm in their heart. It is the quiet competence that speaks for itself. Dismissed, the story of the shot, of the reveal, of the Admiral's salute became an instant legend. It didn't just spread through Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. It went viral, traveling through the encrypted networks and whispered conversations that form the central nervous system of the global military community. It became folklore overnight. In the chow halls, sailors who had been there embellished the details, describing the bullet curving through the air as if guided by magic. In the ready rooms of aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf, fighter pilots toasted the ghost of Coronado, the quiet Master Chief who humbled a loudmouth commander with a single round. On secure forums frequented by special operators, the story was told with a quiet satisfaction. They all knew people like Hayes, the careerist ladder climbers who mistook authority for ability. To see one so publicly and elegantly dismantled by one of their own, a quiet professional of the highest caliber, with a moment of deep collective catharsis. The tale became a parable, a teaching tool. It was a story about the danger of assumptions, the poison of prejudice. It was a reminder that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one you notice the least. Lieutenant Commander Hayes was not formally discharged, but his career was effectively over. Admiral Croft had him reassigned to a desk job in the most remote, forgotten corner of the naval bureaucracy, a place known as the Elephant's Graveyard. It was a quiet, professional execution. Before he left, however, Croft ordered him to report to Master Chief Rostova. The meeting took place in a sterile, windowless classroom. Hayes entered, his face pale, his uniform immaculate, but seeming to hang off him. Anya Rostova was there, not in her anonymous civilian attire, but in her service dress uniform, the chest laden with the ribbons that represented a lifetime of sacrifice. She was cleaning the very same M210 rifle from the demonstration, her movements just as methodical and serene as they had been on a range. Hayes stood before her, swallowed his pride, and offered a stiff, formal apology. He spoke of his arrogance, his misjudgment, his profound regret. She listened patiently, her hands never ceasing their work. When he was finished, a long silence filled the room. He expected a lecture, a condemnation, a final twist to the knife. Instead, she paused, looked up at him, and spoke with a quiet intensity that was more powerful than any shout. "Commander," she said, her voice soft but firm, "your apology is accepted. But your apology is not what matters. What matters is what you do next. Arrogance is a shield for insecurity. You confuse your rank with competence. Never make that mistake again. The best leaders I ever knew were the quietest. They listened more than they spoke. They proved their worth through action, not words. Go and do likewise." It was not an absolution, but a directive. A chance, perhaps the last one he would ever get, to learn, to change, to become something better than what he had been. The moment became its own quiet legend, a footnote to the larger story. But perhaps the most important part, Anya Rostova, for her part, deflected all attention. She was a consultant for a reason. Her active duty days were behind her, and she had no interest in the spotlight. But her act had a ripple effect. The training doctrine for the sniper school at Coronado was subtly rewritten. A new module was added, focusing on instinctual shooting and environmental awareness. Informally known as the Rostova Principle, the M210 rifle from the demonstration was never issued. Instead, it was mounted in a glass case in the main hall of the training command. Beneath it, a simple brass plaque was installed. It did not mention the failed computer or the impossible shot. It simply read, "Competence is a language that needs no translation. Assumptions are a currency with no value." The target from that day, the one with the single, perfect hole in its center, was framed and hung in Admiral Croft's office. It served as a constant reminder for him, and for every officer he briefed in that room, that true strength is often silent, and that the greatest threats and the greatest allies can come in the most unexpected packages. The legend of that day continued to evolve, becoming a foundational myth for a new generation of sailors and Marines. New recruits were told the story as a cautionary tale against hubris. The name Hayes became a verb on the base. "Don't haze this up" meant don't let your ego get in the way of the mission, and the name Rostova became synonymous with the highest ideal of the quiet professional. She was a symbol of the simple, profound truth that what you are is infinitely more important than what you appear to be. Her single shot had done more than hit a target. It had recalibrated the moral compass of an entire institution, reminding them that the loudest voice in the room is rarely the most important. The legacy of that sun-baked afternoon was not in the shattered ego of one commander, but in the quiet inspiration of thousands. It was a story told not just about a legendary sniper, but about the enduring power of humility, the beautiful efficiency of skill, and the undeniable authority of demonstrated excellence. Years later, a young ensign, fresh from the Naval Academy and full of the unshakable confidence that only youth can provide, was holding court in the officers' club at Coronado. He was loud, charismatic, and quick to judge, much like a certain lieutenant commander from a bygone era. He was complaining about a new training protocol, one that forced them to practice with iron sights at what he considered absurd distances. "It's a waste of time," he declared to his table of fellow junior officers. "We have computers for a reason." This is some old-timer nonsense. An older man, a civilian in a worn contractor's polo shirt, was sitting alone at a nearby table, nursing a cup of coffee. He had a weathered face and quiet eyes that seemed to see everything. He had been listening without comment. Finally, he got up, walked over to the ensign's table, and placed a hand on his shoulder. The ensign looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone sharp. The older man smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Son," he said, his voice quiet but carrying a strange weight of authority. "Let me tell you a story about a woman named Anya, a rifle, and a very important lesson in humility." The man's name was Hayes. He had spent the last decade of his career in obscurity, but he had taken Master Chief Rostova's words to heart. He had learned. He had changed. And now, his final mission, his true penance, was to ensure that the lesson he had learned in the most humiliating way possible would not be forgotten. He was no longer a gatekeeper of arrogance, but a quiet guardian of a hard-won truth. The young ensign listened, and as the story unfolded, his bravado melted away, replaced by a look of dawning comprehension and awe. The legacy was not just a plaque on a wall. It was a living, breathing thing passed down from one generation to the next. The triumph of Master Chief Rostova was not a single moment in time, but a perpetual echo, a constant reminder that true honor is not found in the noise you make, but in the silence your competence commands. True legacy isn't what you leave behind in a display case or a history book. It's what continues forward in the hearts and minds of those who come after. It is the lesson that outlives the teacher, the principle that becomes instinct. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where a person's silent, demonstrated skill defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.